Going to learn about communication. So, as we all know, communication is one of the integral part of medical practice. If you maintain a good communication, that will improve our nurse-patient relationship, and also it will save us in many situations. So, today we have Dr. Biju Raghavan, who is a palliative care physician, has more than 15 years of experience in palliative care. Sir is a national faculty of Indian Association of Palliative Care. Now he is working as a palliative care physician in Rajgiri Medical College, Ernakulam. Sir, welcome and over to you, sir.
So can you unmute from your end, sir? So can you unmute? We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. Again, thank you, Shiva. Thank you, Rajlakshmi. Thank you, everybody in Pallium India. It's great to be back with Pallium India. And I would like to apologize because I am inside the hospital right now. I have to wear my mask. So I'm going to wear it. Meanwhile, you can start sharing the presentation. Participants to this program. This is a two-part program. We are going to do communication skills part 1 today, and part 2 will be next week, same day, same time. So today we are going to talk about general issues and what is the importance of communication skills in healthcare, and what are some of the barriers. Not every barrier we can cover, but some of the barriers in communication. And we'll also talk about some of the do's and don'ts. What are the things that we should do and should not do, and how to conduct a clinical interview. We all have learned how to take history during our younger days as young medical students and nursing students. So we will revisit how to take a history. Next slide, please. So healthcare communication is challenging because people don't come to us because they want to come to us. They come to us when they are sick, they are ill, they are in pain, and the starting point itself is negative. That is why it is more challenging than any other service industry. For example, when you go to a hotel or a resort or some place of where you want to have some recreation, you are in a reasonably good mood. But when you come to a hospital, you are anxious, you are afraid, you may be irritated because of your symptoms or because of the pain of your loved one. And hence, we who are working in this healthcare industry, when we are dealing with people, we are usually not experiencing a pleasant interaction. We are dealing with people who are scared, who are suffering. Next slide. So there are some studies which have shown, for example, this study that I have put on the screen. So this shows the best predictor for resolution of headache was the patient's perception that they had an opportunity to tell their story or their problem properly to the doctor during the first visit. This is an old study. It came in, I don't know, in 1986 in a neurology journal, headache journal. But it still holds true that if you make the people feel that they have been listened to, then their satisfaction improves. Next slide. A lot of medical errors happens because of inadequate communication, poor communication, or no communication. Next slide. There is a financial outcome also if you are having poor communication. It can lead to cases, and as a result, uh, you may have to pay a large fee for that. Sometimes there can be loss of resources or damage to property and even injury because of this. So all of that, poor communication means we will have to pay a cost one way or the other. It's very important to have good communication skills. Next slide. Another problem is that we are not tested for our competence in communication skills. We are tested for our knowledge. We have to write exams. We are tested for our practical ability. We have to do practicals. Our clinical abilities, we have to uh, prove that we know how to take a history, how to do a physical examination. All of that is tested. But communication skills are generally not tested in most of our medical and nursing colleges. Next slides. A doctor-patient relationship or a nurse-patient relationship or any healthcare patient relationship or any healthcare and patient family relationship has multiple components, because it is not just a single dimension of interaction that we have. It is a multi-dimensional interaction, and as a result, if we are good communicators, we are likely to make better diagnosis, more accurate diagnosis, because we will get proper information, and we will most probably have a patient who is compliant to our management. Many times, if the doctor writes something on the prescription, the nurse takes the medicine to the patient. The patient refuses. So this kind of non-compliance, a lot of it can be sorted out with better communication. And when you have better compliance, you will have better outcome, and as a result, you will have more patient satisfaction, family satisfaction. They will be happy, and as a result, it will reflect back on us. The healthcare team will also be happy and satisfied with the work they are doing. The patient safety also improves, and the chances of litigation or damage to property or physical injury to the healthcare professional also comes down. All of this happens because of good communication. Next slide, please. So why do we need to learn medical communication? Next slide. First and foremost, we should learn communication skills for our own selfish interest because it benefits us. As I said before, we will have better compliance, we will have good relationship, we will have less stress, and we will have improvement in our professional achievements. Next slide, please. It is good for the patient and family because they will have clarity on what is going on. They will have a sense of direction and purpose, and they will have an idea of what are the costs involved, what are the complications involved. Good communication gives the patient and family a lot of clarity. Next slide. It also creates a lot of, it also will help improve relationship with society, because there are a lot of misconceptions regarding what is possible in modern medicine and what is not possible. So if with each patient and family you educate them about their problems, and then they will have better idea of what is possible and what is not possible. Otherwise, what happens is their expectation will be sky high, and what we are able to provide them will be the reality will be much lower than what is their unrealistic expectation. And when we cannot meet their expectation, they become irritated. They may actually turn against us. And all of this can be avoided if we bring their expectation to reality. and then it will be easier for us to provide care. For that, a lot of truthful discussion, truthful sharing of information is required. Next slide, please. So, what are the barriers to truthful communication? Lot of miscellaneous things can be a barrier to communication. Can we go forward? One, two, three, four. One more. I think. No. Can you go back, please? Yeah. So, a lot of things can be a barrier to communication. A perceived lack of time, lack of privacy, physical barriers like a lot of furniture or computer, etc. on the table, which becomes a hindrance for eye contact. Lot of noise in the background or the constant ringing of mobile phones can be a barrier. Technology. Now, right now, we are doing this session not face to face in physically in a classroom, but we are all far away from each other, and we are doing this through Zoom, which is a technology platform. So many patients and families may not be familiar with technology. We may not be familiar with technology. And even if we are familiar with technology, sometimes technology fails us. There may not be electricity, there may not be internet. All of these things can be barriers to communication. So some of the things we can try to overcome, some of the things we cannot overcome. So we'll have to learn with what we have. Next slide, please. Sometimes the patient can be a barrier. Sometimes the family of the patient can be a barrier. Sometimes the patient may be very introvert, maybe very shy, or maybe very scared, or maybe very tensed, and this will prevent the person from talking freely. So it is our job to make the person feel at ease so that the person can tell whatever he or she wants to tell us. Sometimes the patient's family can be little overbearing and prevent, for example, you may ask a question to the patient, but the family replies instead of the patient. And sometimes the family may tell you not to talk to the patient or not to disclose some bad news to the patient. So all of these things can be barrier from the patient and the patient party. Next slide. Sometimes we can be a barrier. Next, how can we be barrier? There are many ways. Sometimes our appearance can be a barrier to communication. Now, because of Corona, most of us are covered up from head to toe. So even before, there were problems because if we put a stick around our neck or a coat, name tag and all, these are all very official looking things. And then this can create a barrier because then the patient and the family may find it little difficult to come and freely speak to us. But that doesn't mean we should not wear a uniform or should not wear a mask or should not wear a stick around our neck. All of that we should do. But what we have to change is our body language. We'll talk about body language later. So our appearance can be a barrier. People may feel intimidated seeing us, seeing our appearance. Next slide. Our attitude. Next. One more. Can we go back? Yeah. Sometimes our attitude can be little negative, and that will prevent us from learning new skills. Many of our colleagues think that communication skills is a bonus we are giving to the patient, not realizing it is a bonus we are giving to ourselves to protect ourselves, to have some peace of mind, to save time. Good communication skills saves time, right? So it is a bonus we are giving to ourselves and not doing something as a favor to the patient. Next slide. And as I said before itself, our lack of training. Because we don't have structured training programs in communication skills in most of our medical and nursing colleges, that is why we find it very difficult to acquire these skills. We acquire a lot of clinical skills like how to take a BP, how to give an IV injection, and how to put in a cannula, etc., etc., from the very early stages of our life as medical students and nursing students. But equally, if not more important, skills of communication are not taught to us. Next. So going to some of the do's and don'ts, it's not comprehensive, just I picked up a few. So don't avoid what you call, don't avoid eye contact. That is, you must make eye contact. And even if you have a mask, you should still smile behind the mask, because the smile will be seen in your eyes and your smile will be heard in your voice. Instead of that, if you don't smile, if you are grumpy and have an irritated voice, it will only be going to become a barrier to good communication. So don't avoid eye contact, don't be grumpy, don't have an irritated voice. Make an eye contact, do smile behind the mask. And if you don't have a mask, probably you are risking yourself during corona times. So do smile even if you're wearing a mask, because it will be seen in your eyes, it will be heard in your voice. Next slide, please. Don't categorize or label people. For example, I heard during one of my rounds, there were two young nurses in the nursing station uh, doing a handing over and taking over. And the first thing that was told in the process was, room number 236, the patient is a scratch. It was said in Malayalam, but this was what was meant. The patient is a scratch. So that means the patient is very irritating or maybe irritable. So, but that is not how we should be labeling people, because we are never perfect in our personal life. One minute we are happy, one minute we are angry, another minute we are envious, another minute we are sad, another minute we are irritable ourselves. So, how would be like if people label us, oh, this person is an irritable person, this person is not a good person? We will not like it. Similarly, do not judge people, do not label people. Instead of that, we should be non judgmental and accept people as they are. Doesn't matter how they are, just accept that they are this way. Doesn't matter if we have to provide good care irrespective of how they are, and respect people for what they are. You may be very well educated, your patient may be illiterate. That doesn't mean you know all the great things in life and that person doesn't know anything. That person can teach you a lot of things, even if that person is illiterate, right? It's just a matter that we know a lot of medical things. There are many non-medical things that we are not aware of. So always respect people for what they are and accept people as they are. Next slide. Leading questions. For example, when you go for rounds and you're asking, your pain is better, isn't it? Because when you ask a leading question, it becomes very difficult for the patient to answer against what you're trying to say. So if you're saying the pain is better, isn't it? Then it is expected that the patient will answer, yes, my pain is better. But what if the patient pain is not better? The patient will find it difficult to say, no, your medicine did not help me at all. My pain is still there. Some patients may say that, but not every patient can say that. So instead of that, always ask an open-ended question. How are you today? Or how is your pain today? Right? So don't ask leading question, always ask open-ended question. Next slide. Do not minimize, do not compare your patient's problem. Because for each person, their problem is the biggest problem. Telling them that your problem is nothing, don't worry, that does not help. Or telling them that look at that group of patients, look at how much they are suffering, compared to them, your problem is nothing. That comparison is also not helpful. It will only make the person more irritable and unhappy if you minimize the problem or compare the problem. Instead of that, acknowledge their feeling about how they are feeling about their problem. Acknowledge, saying that anybody in your position would perhaps feel the same. And it is important that we normalize not their problem, but normalize their emotional experience of the problem. Considering what you're going through, it is normal to feel that way. Not that your problem is normal, your pain is normal. Why are you feeling this way? Instead of that, experiencing something like that, feeling like that is normal. Anybody who has this kind of problem would be feeling that. So it is important not to minimize or compare, and equally important to acknowledge and normalize their experience. Next slide, please. Don't give false hopes. That is where honest sharing of information comes. Sometimes when we have to give bad news, we sometimes tell lies. Don't worry, everything will be all right. We are with you. So it is very important. Don't give false hope, but always give realistic hope. Always give realistic hope. In palliative care, you will learn that there are so many things that we can do where normally we will think it's a hopeless situation. But in palliative care, there is nothing like a hopeless situation. Any and every situation, there is something that we can offer to the patient and the family. Next slide. Do not assume. For example, if the patient is poor and is wondering, how am I going to feed my children? And without, if you are not aware of that, and the person says, I'm so worried, then you say, don't worry, your cancer is advanced, but we will make sure that you are comfortable. We're all there for you, don't worry. So without understanding what this patient is saying, without understanding why this person is worried, you jump to some conclusion by assuming this or that, and then you give some nice words. Those words become totally empty and useless. So whenever somebody says, I'm scared, I'm worried, ask them, what is it that they are worried about? And then they will tell you. Ask and they will tell you. So it's most important not to jump into a conclusion, not to assume, ask. And once they tell you, it's possible that you may not have a solution to their problem. But listening to them, allowing them to ventilate their emotion is therapeutic. Even if you don't have a solution, you have already helped by listening to them. Next slide. Don't forget the human touch. In the beginning stages of Corona in March and April of 2020, even I was very scared of touching people, and I was, initially wearing gloves all the time and sanitizing my hands every half an hour. So all of that things, probably because I was like everybody else, I was also scared. Over a period of time, I realized that we have to be careful, but we don't have to be scared. And it's very important to bring back the human touch in our care program. So whenever we are visiting patients, make sure that if we have a good relationship with them, if we know them, it's always important to have a human touch. And also, it is very important to be kind on yourself, because, as I said, healthcare is a stressful area of work. I mean, we face a lot of stress. We face a lot of stress in our personal life also. So it is not easy living as a healthcare provider, whether it be a doctor, nurse, physiotherapist, or dietitian, or any other profession, even as a security person in the hospital environment. It is a stressful work area, mainly because we have a lot of patients and families who are also very much stressed. So it is very important to make sure that you take good care of yourself. When you are tired, when you are tired, don't quit, take rest. When you are tired, don't quit, take rest. Many a times when what happens, sometimes everything gets very overwhelming. We get so frustrated, we may resign from the job, and then we look for some other place, or we'll decide to sit. in home doing nothing. So if if it is not possible, then we may work half-heartedly. That is not the way to do it. You have to take care of yourself. Do a little bit of exercise. Your body should move. Do a little bit of meditation. You can do any kind of meditation depending on your choice. But meditation is essentially exercise for the brain. And have some hobbies because it keeps your spirit happy, and stay connected with people, stay connected with nature. If you are an animal lover, stay connected with your pets and other animals. Help stray animals. If you want to read something, it helps you stay connected with thoughts of the writers around the world from across ages. And love trees, love plants, love nature, and everything. So it is very important to stay connected because it is important for your body, mind, and soul. It has a healing property. So practice self-care. Next slide. So I was talking about this, how to take history. We all know how to take history of presenting complaint, past history of presenting complaint, past history of other illness, family history, etc. All of these things you must be aware of. I'm just saying that we will try to improve on that. That's why I've written history taking 2.0. First of all, whenever you meet people, always greet. So greeting has these three components. One, you make eye contact, and then you smile and nod your head, and then you say something which is culturally appropriate. You can say hello, good morning, namaste, namaskaram, whatever. So first and foremost, however busy you are, doesn't matter. When you are meeting somebody for the first time on that day, or you may be meeting this person for the first time in your life, or you may have met this person many times, doesn't matter. First time you meet this person in the day, you greet the person first. And then you get comfortable, you make the other person also comfortable. How? If you are in an OPD area or if you are a nurse, you are in your nursing station and this person has come to meet you, then you offer the person a chair. If you don't have a chair for the person, you also stand. Don't make the other person stand and you sit. Either you offer the person a chair or you also stand. If you are seeing the patient in the IP, if you're a doctor, you've gone for rounds. If you're a nurse, you've gone for your nursing rounds to take vitals and just to inquire. Then take a stool or a chair and sit by the bedside while you are talking to this person. That is, make yourself comfortable and make the other person also comfortable. And when you start the interviews, you start with an open-ended question. How are you today? Or how may I help you? And you can say it in your local language in a culturally appropriate. And thereafter, listen. And when you listen, do not interrupt. Do not interrupt, but you have to encourage the other person to talk. Next, how do you encourage the other person to talk? You maintain eye contact and nod your head from time to time and make some encouraging noises like okay, okay. So that kind of encouraging noises you make once in a while so that you keep the person, you encourage the person to talk. So not only you permit the person to talk by not interrupting, you also encourage the person to talk. And while the person is telling his or her problems or whatever they have, in case you didn't understand something, you clarify it then and there. Don't wait for it for some other time because sometimes the conversation may go in some direction. So clarify as you go along and also find out their insight. For example, if the local doctor asks this person to get an X-ray done, and then the person says, with this X-ray, I went to with this X-ray, the doctor told me to go to the city hospital. So you must ask, why did the doctor ask you to get an X-ray done? And probably the person says, I don't know. He asked me to get an X-ray done, so I got it X done. And then you can ask, what was there in the X-ray? What did the doctor tell you? This person says, he told me there is something like a shadow, and he wanted a higher opinion. That is why he referred me to the city hospital. So that much he understands. So this is what his insight is. So when somebody says something, you have to dig more, ask what they understand about the situation. And you, along with it, you can also ask what their concerns are. So you can ask, so did you get worried that you had to, that you were being referred to city hospital? Did you get stressed? Did you get scared? And you could ask, what were your concerns? Were you concerned about any financial issues? So it's very important to find out what they understand about the situation, also what their concerns are regarding the situation. Next slide, please. So once you have all the information, you have checked the patient, etc., then you have to share the information, and the sharing of information has to be done honestly and use simple language. Do not use medical jargon, and you have to speak in a language that the people can understand. Once the information has been shared, this can be done for simple things like pneumonia, or it can be even done for very complicated things like a metastatic cancer lung. So it doesn't matter if for simple thing to very complex medical condition, we have to share information honestly. And once we have shared information, then we have to discuss management options. For example, what treatment is available and what is not available, what can be done, what cannot be done, when it can be done, how much is going to cost. All of these things can be discussed later, subsequently. It's possible that we may be giving them the best option, but they are not willing to accept it for many reasons. Either they may have no money, or they may have difficulty arranging finances, or they may have difficulty having a bystander, or they may have some fears regarding the treatment options we have given, or they may have some beliefs which prevents them from taking this kind of option. So whatever it is, we have to accept and respect what they are saying. We can always tell them that what are the consequences of not going ahead with a certain management you have suggested, but that doesn't mean you pressure people to accept your way or my way or the highway. That cannot be done. We have to listen to them, what their concerns are, what their beliefs are, and try to discuss this. Because ultimately, the decision has to be done, taken by a consensus. In the old days, like the medical personnel or maybe the big doctor will tell this is what needs to be done, and the patient can either take that option or go somewhere. But nowadays, we say that you give them what are the best options and listen to what are their concerns, what are their limitations, and then come to the most practical decision by consensus. And once the decision has been taken, then you summarize whatever has happened. Now, all of this may look little complicated because we are adding on to what we have learned as our history taking, but once you make this as part of your regular habit of taking history, then you realize that it actually makes it more comprehensive, easier, and easy to function with this kind of history taking. Next slide. Confirm the treatment plan, including when is the next follow-up visit. Many times I talk to people, and I see that in their discharge summary, properly it is written, review on so and so date and all. So I ask them, so did you go and meet? So they will have no idea because nobody told them. And not many people will read the discharge summary and read it thoroughly and find out. Many people don't know how to read it in English, and even if those who can read English, they may not understand a lot of things that is written in there. So many a times we have to tell them, otherwise they will not. And before we close the interview, the last thing after all the discussion, when we are just winding up the interview, ask them, is there anything else that you need to ask? Or is there anything that you have to say? So this leaves usually brings a smile to the uh, patient and the family. And usually they will say no, but in case they have something more to ask, you are giving them an option. And thereafter, you close the interview by leaving the door open. That means you give them a contact number on which you or your team member can be contacted before the next follow-ups. If you don't want to give your personal mobile number, don't give it, but give them some contact number, hospital number, department number, any number. And once that is done, then you finish with a greeting. Again, three components. You make an eye contact, you smile, nod your head, and then you say what is appropriate locally. You can say bye, good day, namaste, namaskaram, or in my case, I usually say Apo Sheri. So that's how I usually end up. And I think that we are finishing the presentation also. Next slide. So please understand that doesn't matter whatever, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, or whether you know 10 languages or you know only one language, none of that matters, because communication skill is not a talent, it is a learned skill. Just like we learned so many subjects and we became doctors and nurses and other professionals, physiotherapists, dietitian, etc., etc. Similarly, this is something that we all can learn, and the more we practice, the more we improve. Next slide. Yeah, so I think that's about it. Next session next week, we'll be talking about communicating bad news, managing pollution, and dealing with an angry person. I think I'll finish it here. Back to Shiba. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any doubts regarding this session? No doubt, sir. We can move on to the case presentation.
Yes, please.
So, Manisha Joshi. Sister Manisha Joshi from Ganga Prem Hospice will be presenting a patient story today.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
Sister
Good
Manisha,
afternoon, ma'am. Is I'm audible?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Myself, Manisha Joshi, from Uttarakhand, Ganga Prem Hospice. I'm working as a nurse in Ganga Prem Hospice from last 2 years. My patient is 54, male patient. Patient diagnosis metastatic CA esophagus. Patient have patient having difficulty in swallowing, weakness, weight loss, excessive oral secretion, difficulty in walking, low moon. History of illness में patient is apparently well before 7 months ago when he suddenly have difficulty in swallowing, pain, loss of appetite, weakness, weight loss. For that patient go to nearby hospital where undergone for some investigation and diagnostic procedure. Patient diagnosed their metastatic CA esophagus. After diagnosis, he gone through surgery where doctors put in jejunostomy and underlying palliative chemotherapy. Then he referred to GPH for palliative care. When he referred to us, Patient was in so much pain, excessive oral secretion, dysphagia, weakness, weight loss, or poor appetite. We done examination. Patient temperature is normal, 36.6 degrees Celsius. Blood pressure also normal, 110 by 70 mmHg. Pulse 104 beats per minute. Respiration rate 18 beats per minute. O2 is 99% in room air. Patient ecos performance is status 3. General patient look weak, dry skin, not able to walk. Chest is clear. SpO2 is normal, 99%. No any abnormal sound ausculted by us by CNS. Patient was well oriented to place, person, and time. Mouth dry mouth. Patient has dry mouth and coated tongue with excessive oral secretion. Abdomen surgery, excessive surgery excision visualized in abdomen with jejunostomy. No tenderness found. CVC में BB recheck 160 mmHg. Treatment and significant investigation में patient was undergone for surgery and 2 cycles of palliative chemotherapy. Doctor decide to give more chemotherapy, but because of weakness or less intake of diet, uh, they 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 refuse to give chemotherapy. Psychological aspects में fear. Patient was worried about her 2 daughters and her wife. Patient having some financial issues also. Patient belonged to lower middle class family. Before patient was doing some labor work, and now no one in family uh, who can help patient for financial issues. Ideas. He has no idea about his condition. He wants to cure. He wants to remove his jejunostomy tube. Function. He was not able to walk, not able to swallow, not able to sleep due to pain. Expectation. He wants to be cured from his disease, wants to go home and symptomatically better. He wants to remove his jejunostomy tube and wants to eat from mouth. When patient admitted in hospice, uh, he was he was on pain. So our doctor advised Pantop D before breakfast, Tramadol TDS for pain, PCM TDS for pain, Buscopan BD for oral secretions, Mucangel TDS, and amitriptyline at bedtime. Patient's main concern, patient was unknown to his diagnosis, not understand that he has less time. When I want to ask that, when do you think we have to tell the patient about diagnosis with our health team? I want to help my patient financially through some NGO and want educational sponsorship for his daughter to reduce his concern. Patient was also worried for his wife, and how do I help to patient's wife? Summary. A 50 years old man with metastatic CA esophagus lived with 2 daughters and his wife. He wished to cure with his disease, want to be a pain free, and wants to remove his feeding tube so that he can eat through mouth and live with his family. He he extremely thankful to our hospice because now pain is better and symptomatically is better, but because patient has less time, or patient thinks that if his symptoms is better, one day he can improve his health, or he can go to his home. Discussion points. I want to ask my colleagues, how can I help my patient? How to communicate about his diagnosis? Which health member with which health members can help me to communicate with patient and his family? How can I help my patient and his family financially? Doctors explained about patient, diagnosed to patient's wife, but she was not able to understand and not expect the condition about her husband's health. How can I deal with this situation and how to communicate?
Thank you, Manisha.
Thank you, ma'am.
Sir, over to you.
Uh, I think Shiva, you should open the discussion for participants, because then we will get an idea of what others think,
Okay, sir.
instead of this only being, like one person feeding information.
So first question.
Like,
Okay.
Sister Manisha Joshi has done an excellent job of making a very comprehensive presentation. So I'm sure that she herself might have some suggestions, but before we go there, we should give a chance to other participants to share their ideas of how they think that how they would like to help Sister Manisha uh, with the challenges that Sister Manisha is facing.
Okay, sir. So the first question, how can I help my patient and his family financially?
Yes, yes. So, with other participants who are presently, participating, would you give some suggestions to Sister Manisha of how she can help her patient?
So either you can chat or unmute yourself and ask, talk.
Yeah, I believe that I think we must have an orientation about what is the family background of the patient. He said he is the only earning member, but what about his housing? I mean, all that social status, if you know, then we'll be able to contribute little more. How
We
we
can
can.
ask we can ask Sister Manisha.
Yeah.
Sister Manisha, would you please want to answer?
Sir, when patient pain is better, then we decided when he was symptomatically better, then we decide to give all the information about his diagnosis. Maybe he has some
No. See, the
dream.
person who asked the question, the person is asking what is the background of the patient and family. I mean, he was the earning member. What was he doing? And what about his wife? Is she also working? Or what is her role? Is she can she uh, do some job? What is the? Do you have any information about that?
Uh, so before patient was working as a labor, and he earned only 2,000 rupees per day. His wife was uneducated, and his children was studying in third or sixth class in primary school.
Okay, excellent. So you have this much information. So now, what would the audience tell Sister Manisha? We are here to find some solutions for the problems that Sister Manisha has brought to our attention. So now that the question was, what is the family background? Sister Manisha has given the family background. So how can we help this family? What are the suggestions you would like to give to Sister Manisha?
Yeah, even though his wife is not working, not educated. I think what the labor where he was doing something, can she replace his role, or is that some support so that we can get from there? Like,
So the question is, can his wife start working and become the earning member of the family.
Yeah. I
Is-
mean, where he was,
okay.
yeah.
We'll ask Manisha. Sister Manisha, would you like to
Yes.
answer that question?
Yes, sir. There's no problem to doing as a labor, but my problem is that his wife not accepted the problem. Main problem was that he he is not he didn't accepted that his husband was not in such condition.
Okay, so wife is not accepting that the husband is in a bad condition, even though you have explained to her.
Prognosis to
You
patient
have
wife.
explained to her.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, see, audience, you are hearing what Sister Manisha is saying. She has explained to the. Have you explained it to the patient also? I mean, the doctor
So,
has explained.
so we decided to explain patients. Then our team, our social worker, our two nurses and doctors go to patient when patient condition is better. Then we tell the patient about his diagnosis, but he thought that he will cure.
He will get cured. And what about the patient's wife? Is she also thinking like that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So is that preventing her from taking up a job?
Yes, sir. He
Oh,
he thought that he will cure his husband, and then they will go to home and then they will work.
they will be back to normal, right?
Yes,
She
sir.
will take care of the house and husband will start working. So that
Yes,
is
sir.
what her expectation is.
Yes, sir.
And probably that is what the patient's expectation is. Is that how it is?
So same thing. He will cure and he will go to home.
Right. So, okay, now what has the audience got to offer, Sister Manisha?
So I think that we have to communicate more about the patient, more insight into his condition. And they can go through that Kubler's model of that
Okay.
this thing.
So
Like see the patient is
would you like to say a few words about the Kubler's model?
so I mean, from the discussion, I believe that is in a denial stage. Acceptance has not come up still. So I think we have to give more insight into the condition, to the condition. I believe so.
Manisha, did you hear that? Sister Manisha.
Yes, sir.
So I'm sorry, I did not get who is the person who was making that suggestion.
I'm just saying.
Jessie, sir, Jessie.
Are you also a nurse?
Yes, yeah, I'm a nurse.
And where are you working, Sister Jessie?
I'm in AIMS working in neonatal ICU.
AIMS, Delhi.
Yeah.
Okay, Sister Jessie from neonatal ICU of AIMS Delhi is saying that probably the patient and the wife are in denial. Sister Manisha, what do you have to say about that?
Yes, sir. I thought also that he was in grief and he was in denial. They both are in denial.
Right. So denial is a what do you call, it's a psychological state. It is actually it's something that we see when people are subjected to extreme emotion. It helps people keep their sanity by going into denial. So it is not that they are voluntarily going into denial, it just happens because it helps people keep their sanity. It is in that sense has a protective effect on the psyche. And the problem with that is sometimes the denial becomes a barrier to effective communication. Sometimes people may in denial, but they will comply with all the suggestions given by the healthcare team. And that is fine. In that situation, we may not have to break the denial. However, if it becomes a barrier to either receiving proper medical care or it becomes a barrier in counseling, then probably we may have to continue counseling, not once, not twice, sometimes more than that, so that they come out of their denial. Because without it, then we cannot proceed in how we can manage the situation going forward. For example, their expectation, as you mentioned, Sister Manisha, that their expectation is that he will become cured and he will probably go back to work. So the wife will not have to work outside to earn money. That expectation and the reality is totally mismatched. And this will lead to problems later. And that is why it is very important to continue talking to them, explaining to them, finding out opportunities to talk to them and explain to them. It is not going to be easy. There will be resistance, but eventually they will come to a realization that he is not getting better. At that point of time, if you have already counseled them or your team has already counseled them a couple of times, it will be easier for them to come to terms with it. Instead of you have counseled them only once and not counseled them later on, then probably it will become little more difficult to regain their trust. So continuing to engage with them is important. Mr. Manisha,
Yes, sir.
do you have any comments on what I just said?
Sir, I think it was good decision. I have to do that.
Yeah.
I and our team have to do that.
Yes, yes. You have to continue the engagement. You have to continue your door open for communication. You will continue to experience the resistance of denial, but that doesn't mean we just stop trying. Trying and failing is acceptable. Not trying is not acceptable.
Yes, sir.
Second thing was regarding of helping them financially. Of course, it is very important that you get through the denial and get the patient and the wife accept the reality, so that the wife can then plan for getting becoming in charge for her children's future. So until unless she doesn't earn, then this is going to affect her children's education and as a result their future. So that is an important point that you can bring in the discussion at a later point of time. Meanwhile, how else can you help them financially? And I throw this to the question to the audience. How else can Sister Manisha help them financially? There is some mentioning of NGOs and things like that. So would anybody like to help Sister Manisha with some ideas? Sister Manisha and her team would like to help our patient and his family financially. Of course, you cannot expect Sister Manisha to, every day, monthly, take out some money from her salary and give it to them. It's not possible. It's not practical. So, how can, can you come up with some ideas you can give to Sister Manisha?
Any government sponsored program like the one which is in the Karunya, like in Kerala.
Uh-huh. Is there something like that in Uttarakhand, Sister Manisha?
So actually, sometime when we have very poor patients, we give, our hospice also give some sponsors, education and sponsorship, and ration. We provide ration in home also,
Okay.
and we also
Are they
have
from
some NGOs
India?
who can help us.
Okay. Are they from some nearby area where your team can continue
Yes,
providing
yes,
them this?
sir.
Okay. So, so the question to the audience is, apart from that, how can we help such poor patients and families? Sister Jessie mentioned that there can be government schemes. So we must find out what are the state government schemes available, what are the central government schemes available, and make the patient and family aware of such schemes. We can have our volunteers to help the patient and family access such schemes and benefits of such schemes. So, getting the benefit from the government schemes is one point. Then Sister Manisha mentioned that their organization itself is providing. So there can be some charitable organizations, some NGOs, which are helping patients and families and financially not well-to-do families cope up with their problems. There are some NGOs who are helping with children's education. There are some NGOs who are helping with clothes. Uh, there are some NGOs who are working with food grains and making sure about hunger. Yes, from Sister Diana has said that help the wife get some job. Once we get over the denial on the patient and wife's part, then we have to think of how we can get the wife gainfully employed. Remember, she also has to look after small children, and as long as the husband is alive, mostly she will also have to take care of the husband. So it may not be possible for her to go out and do a full-time job. It must be something flexible. So all of those considerations have to be brought in. Any other suggestions?
So she can also do some craft work or handwork in home, like making clothes through stitch machine
Right.
or
So
something.
so any kind of work from home options would be welcome, even though most of them don't give them, don't create a lot of income, unlike a full-time job. But it is something. It is something. So it has to be a multi-pronged approach, which will help the patient and family to get along financially. Right? Okay. Shiba, any comments in the chat box? I'm sorry, I haven't looked into the chat box.
No, sir, the government scheme like we discussed earlier, that's all.
Okay. Any suggestion from your side, Shiba?
No,
You're
sir.
after all working with a very powerful NGO called Palim India from the time it came into existence.
As we discussed earlier, we can think for occasional rehabilitation if possible. So we can think for occasional rehabilitation and fundraising also. We can make some, if they are willing, so we can discuss at the small groups and make funds for them and give to the money. And that way we can start a vocational rehabilitation like uh, candle making or anything
Mhm.
based on their wish.
Correct. So that is important. They should have an interest in something. They should have some knowledge. Then the skill upgradation has to be there. There has to be somebody to help them with getting the raw material and to market the finished products. And all of those things are important. One person may not be able to do. So it has to be a combined effort. I think the first goal should be to have food in the stomach for the patient,
Okay.
their children and wife, everybody. I think the second option should be, the second goal should be that the children's education is completed. Because when children lose out on education, they go down uh, two generation, they go back two generation. So there, we all get better than our parents' generation only because of the education our parents have given us. And that is why we have to make sure that the next generation is educated, because education is the only instrument with which we can improve our life. So that is a very important goal, that the children's education continues. So that is the two important goals: food in the stomach and education to be continued. I think there was one more question that Sister Manisha had put up in the goals or in the discussion part. When should we communicate the diagnosis? So Sister Manisha had put up a question: when is the right time to communicate the diagnosis? Probably a bad news. So what is the opinion of the audience? When should we communicate it? Or should we communicate it at all? All right. Mr. Diana says, when as soon as we get the prognosis, whenever the patient is ready.
He has been referred to hospice, so must have been communicated some or the other way in the beginning itself, I believe.
Okay. Any so that is probably an assumption. The question is, when should we be communicating? So from beginning time itself is what generally people are saying. Organize a family conference when you know about this diagnosis, right, Sister Faustina? From diagnosis onwards, okay. Right. I think you all have got it sorted out. I also agree. We should start communicating to the patient and family from the beginning itself. From this time we start getting the diagnosis, we don't have to wait for everything to come and then talk. We can keep them updated on whatever new results are coming up. So we can tell them the X-ray report is showing so and so, and then we are sending them for scan, and then we can tell them the scan report has come out so and so, and then we are telling, and then we are sending them for biopsy, and then once the biopsy report comes, we can tell them this is what the biopsy report has come up. So if you can start sharing of information from the beginning, that would be the best. Problem happens that at each stage, we do not tell it to the patient, and all this information accumulates. And at a later date, many a times the family tells you, don't tell it to the patient. And that is called collusion. We'll talk about collusion next week. And once you have a lot of information, then communicating bad news, all of this information together also becomes a big burden. We'll talk about how to communicate bad news next week. And sometimes we may have to deal with anger also, not necessarily related with communicating bad news, but many times because of so much frustration that builds up, you may have a patient or even a family member getting angry. And we'll talk about how to deal with an angry person also next week. I hope we will have a good interaction next week also. Shiba, if is there any other discussion that we need to carry on, please take it forward.
No, sir. I think we can wind up here.
Okay,
If they
then
have
I
any
would.
doubts, if they have any doubts, we can.
Yes, yes, that was the next thing.
Yes.
If anybody in the audience would want, if any of you want to have any more questions, please ask or put in the chat room.
Okay, sir, we can wind up here.
Okay, so I would like to thank you, everybody. Before we go, I'd like to ask Sister Manisha, did you get answers to the questions that you had put out?
Sister Manisha?
Sister Manisha, can you unmute from your end and speak?
Sister Manisha, are you satisfied with today's response to your queries? Did you get
Yes, sir.
did you get some answers to your queries?
Yes, sir. Thank you.